This is a San Martin that's actually not a San Martin. I know, sounds confusing, but stay with me. You see, recently San Martin decided to launch a new sub-brand, one that's dedicated completely to original designs, and will only be sold directly through their website, so no AliExpress shenanigans. And this watch right here, the JIANGHUN Wardrum, is their first attempt. Now, there's a lot to talk about here, including my thoughts on this whole new sub-brand thing, so we might as well jump into it. But before we do, I also need to point out that this watch was provided by the brand, and they're not asking for it back, hence the promotional tag. That said, let's talk Wardrum. And at first glance, yeah, this one may seem bafflingly confusing as to what exactly they're trying to do with this design. Because that's how it was for me. I took this thing out of the box and I started staring at it and just said, why is this crown so huge? They say it's inspired by a war drum, so I kind of get the rounded shape and maybe the indices look like the edging around a drum. But as a whole, I didn't really get it until I turned the watch on its side. And I noticed, hey, this looks like an old school pocket watch with this giant crown. One with wired lugs seeming to come out of that pocket watch. And then it hit me. This is an old school trench watch, or at least their attempt at one, and trench watches were the very first field watches. And that's where soldiers modified old school pocket watches just to wear on their wrists. So, in a lot of ways, this is the same idea as what Vario was doing with their 1918, creating a modern trench watch. But I gotta say that Ivan and Vario did it completely differently. With them, they were more emphasizing the elegant nature of those original watches. Whereas here, San Martin or JIANGHUN, or however you pronounce it, is more focusing on, say, the ruggedness, with kind of this odd original twist. But at its heart, it's still a trench watch. And I think that's extremely clear just from the case design. It's round with this buttery smooth blasted finish until you get to the top. And this is one part I really like with the case, where the Arabic indices are carved into it just outside the dial, with polished smooth channels sitting in between acting as sort of the sector dial thing. All while the smooth curvature of the case continues up and then on to a very nice domed sapphire. The wired lugs that sit on the outer edge, honestly, I'm not quite as keen on those as the case shape. I think I wish they were just less pronounced. Maybe a little more curvy and smaller, kind of like what Vario did with theirs. As well as with a much shorter lug to lug. Because this one, at almost 50 millimeters, is quite long. Now, those lugs are angled down, which helps. But even with that, on my 7¼ inch wrist, there was quite a bit of overhang. Then you got the massive onion crown at the right. It's big. And like I said, at first I was wondering what the heck they were doing with this thing. Until I actually figured it out. And at that point, I was like, okay, I get it. And as big as this crown is, it never hit the back of my wrist while wearing it. And as big as it is, I gotta say it's pretty easy to use. I mean, it'd be strange if it wasn't. Now, the good news here is that they are using a dateless Seiko NH38, so no ghost date. And if you didn't catch it earlier, there's 200 meters of water resistance on this thing. So you got dive watch-like capabilities and a field watch, which is great. However, this is one of the few areas where I started to have a little bit of an issue with the watch, where sometimes when you pull the crown out to set the time and try to push it back in, it doesn't always go back in. Like sometimes it's just not sitting right, and when you push it in, it just kind of pushes itself back out until you try again, and then usually it snaps in. Honestly, I'm not sure what's causing it, and this is something I've seen before, and it always seems to be on bigger, heavier crowns. So maybe the weight of the crown is causing it not to sit straight when you try to push it in? I don't know. But whatever it is, hopefully this won't cause any long-term issues, but I just want to mention it so that you're aware. And then, flipping the watch over, you have a closed screwed-in case back, as well as one of my favorite design bits of the watch. As far as case backs go, this is cool, classy, and not over the top, while still showcasing the brand's heritage. And what I love about it is that there's a lot of this that reminds me of the Mega Seamaster Seahorse casebacks, but here it's done with a dragon. So while the watch isn't an homage, maybe you could say the caseback is. But either way, I actually really like this. However, homage is not a word you'd use with a dial, and as far as I know, there are 4 different colorways, with this one being the purple one. which actually surprised me because it doesn't seem that purple. It comes across as more of a dark brown, and the purple bits aren't obvious until you start to look for them. In fact, the only reason I know that this is the purple colorway is because of the purple strap they sent with it. And notice the strap isn't actually on the watch. We'll talk about that in a second. The dial design here is going to be polarizing, if that wasn't obvious. But I actually really like what they did with it, where it's this textured sandwich dial with cutouts around the indices. But you still have this little center island sitting in the middle, as well as the yellow ones at the cardinal points, which really stand out. But with that sandwich dial comes a lot of depth, and the way that works with the crystal distortion and the Arabics on the case, it's surprisingly cool and captivating. An emphasis on surprising, because when I saw the images first online, I just thought the thing was weird. But once I got in person and saw the effect and the depth, it really is cool. And especially the cardinal points with the yellow tips. I don't think they're actually higher than any of the other indices, but I found myself constantly staring at them just to see if they're taller than the others. And I also really like how the cutouts on the indices go backwards towards the Arabics on the case, as it seems to bring those Arabics into the design and tie everything together, making the watch and the present seem even bigger, which in some ways might be a bad thing. This is a 42, but I think they could have gone down with a 40. Because, like I said, the present seems so huge with it. But maybe that's what they were going for. And the only thing I don't particularly like with the dial is the hands. Now, the second hand is okay, but the hour and minute hands, they're a little short, a little flat, and perhaps just too boring for this dial design. As for the Lume could be better, which is pretty disappointing to say since this is from San Martin, although not a San Martin. The hands here are good, and they are able to keep up with a Seiko diver, so it's still very functional. But the cool part, the cool bits of the indices and that odd design that comes to life when the lights go out, those don't really last long. And that's ultimately what's disappointing. And before I forget, we gotta talk about the strap, which, if you're like me, you're just gonna give up on and just take off the watch. It really is the worst part here. I mean, it does look good with the watch. It's a decent leather, but my god, these things are stiff. And especially near the watch head where there's this extra padding. And to the brand's credit, they did let me know about that beforehand and asked I'd mention something to you guys. So it's a known issue. But it might be worse than they think, because there's no taper and it's really thick. And that makes it really uncomfortable right out of the box. Even though it is a 20mm strap, I swear this thing felt like I was wearing a big thick 22. And to top it off, it is a tad short. So if you have a 7.5 or above inch wrist, this one may not work for you. Which again, may not be a bad thing because you might just take it off anyways. Now eventually, after a while, the strap really should break in. And at that point, it's probably good. Maybe. But like I said, I just gave up on it and switched to something a bit more flexible with more taper. And I gotta say that even though it's an odd design, this one does look good with a variety of straps. So when you do find a strap that works, or maybe when you break this one in, it does become much more comfortable to wear. Now, it is a bit tall at 13.7mm, and there is overhang on my 7.25 inch wrist thanks to those giant lugs. But it's still comfortable enough to wear throughout the day, and I have. Now, as for price, this one is still just like a San Martin, so I think it's sitting right around $269. And for a solid, well-built watch, even one you'll probably swap the strap on, that's not bad. At least not these days, because the quality is definitely here for that price. It's more of a question of if that unique design is really vibing with you. And with something like this, I think it's just best to go with your first gut reaction. Now, before we wrap this whole thing up, let's talk a bit about what San Martin is doing with this new brand. In some ways, it's a good idea, and in others, it's absolutely horrible. I get the idea of creating a new brand to showcase true original watches. I actually like that. And creating their own website away from AliExpress is a great idea as it could build more confidence in the brand. AliExpress is better these days, but sometimes you still get burned. But creating a sub brand with a completely different name and one that's going to be really hard for Western audiences to pronounce, because I'm still not sure I'm saying it right, is a bad idea. And not just because it's hard to pronounce, but because it throws away the brand recognition they've developed over the last few years. A lot of you probably don't remember this, but I was one of the first reviewers to ever look at a San Martin. That was a long time ago when AliExpress was a totally different place. That was back when nobody had ever heard of them, and everyone was just going for these $60 weird dress watch Cadisons or Guanchin watches. It was a different place. Now, I saw that there was a brand that was a little more expensive, and I was curious how good the quality was. And after reviewing it, most of you who saw that video thought I was crazy for spending $150 to $200 on one of these watches. Yet, look at where we are today. That's the norm. My point is that I've seen firsthand how the brand has built up its reputation. And throwing it away like this to me is just like a new Coke situation. It's a bad idea. And I get wanting to have a separate brand showcasing the original designs, but they should have tied it to the San Martin brand better. Or at all. Like, they should have called it San Martin Originals and come up with a cool logo. Or maybe San Martin Reserve. Something like that. Something that lets people know this is a San Martin. But, it is what it is, and we'll just have to see how this one plays out. Bottom line, the Wardrum is an interesting, but ultimately it's going to be a very divisive watch because of its original design. Which, let's be honest, should be expected when you go with these oddball designs. They're not mainstream, and the appeal won't be. As much as we complain about all the homages, that's what sells. And hopefully San Martin is expecting this, and they won't be totally surprised when this doesn't sell out. Otherwise, they're probably listening to the wrong people. But I can tell you, for those that like the look and are willing to swap out the strap, you'll probably wind up liking it. It's really well made and has a great price, as well as there's nothing else really like it out there. And from having this oddball original design, there are bits of it that remind me of the Phoebus Great Wall, which at the time didn't sell well, but it's now a cult favorite of the brand. But as for me, I'm actually kind of torn on this one. Like, it was fun to wear, I'm very curious about the brand is going to be going and doing next. But now that the review is over, I'm not really jonesing to put this back on my wrist. And I'm kind of torn about that. Because even just now, picking it up and on a strap like this, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking there's a lot of really cool elements here. Yet, for some reason, I'm just not really vibing with it. It's a watch I want to like more than I actually do. As a whole, as a complete package, I honestly feel lukewarm to it. But for some reason, I'm just not connecting with it. It's a watch I want to like more than I actually do. And sometimes that's just how it is with the more unusual designs. They aren't for everyone. But I'm sure there are some out there who will love it. However, let me know what you think down below about the watch, and what do you think about this whole new Coke situation? The brand, the new name, what they should have called it if you don't like it, everything. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe down below, do something, helps the channel. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.